Well, good morning. Good to see everyone here this morning, with Becky and the kids being gone this past week, starting on Tuesday, and I'll pick them up this coming Wednesday morning. I've been reminded of the words of Jesus from Matthew 25 when he said, "You saw me hungry and you fed me." She left behind lots of food that I can cook and prepare, but so many of you have shared meals with me that I have been able to tell her I've been well taken care of. And in fact, that there is going to be so much of that food left over when she gets back that then she can then cook that for me. Come on, if she was here, she'd laugh. I think. This is the third Sunday of the month, and so it's an exciting time. We get to have our song and scripture service in the evening. But this morning, as we've been doing since January, it also means we're going to do a Godly Woman series. This is part 5. It's Proverbs 31, an excellent wife. And we're going to be looking at Proverbs 31. We're not going to have time to read through the whole chapter. I'm going to just give that a disclaimer right away. We're going to be looking at some key parts of that, especially starting in verses 10 and onward. But even then, we're not going to be able to have time this morning to read through it all. But I do encourage and invite you to turn with me to Proverbs 31. And for those that might remember, for about a month or two, or at least 2 months, we had a sheet in the back that I'd asked the women to kind of rank the women. There were 9, and you got to rank 8, because I said at the very end, we're going to be looking at Mary, the mother of Jesus. She is going to be the finale of this series. So I asked you to rank the 8 women that we're going to be looking at in the order you would like to hear them. For those of you who want to know where Proverbs 31, an excellent wife, fell, ranking-wise, you voted her number 8. So for those who voted for her, you'd be happy to be here this morning because she's number 5 chronologically, which was what the winning vote ended up at. So number 1 is Esther. We'll get her in July. She's number 7 chronologically. Number 2 was Sarah, who also fell number 2 chronologically. Eve was number 3, but we looked at her first. And then Ruth was number 4. Abigail was number 5, but we looked at Abigail last time. So last month we looked at Abigail. This week, or this month, we are looking at Proverbs 31 in a lesson I've entitled An Excellent Wife. As we kind of look at the series as a whole, one of the things I had originally intended to do with this particular passage from Proverbs 31 was I had it in my mind, even if we voted on them to be ranked, I kind of had in my mind to do Proverbs 31 first and Mary last, and then have you rank the others and how you'd like to see them. And even after we decided on chronologically, I still decided I should do Proverbs 31 first. And my thought process behind that was this is kind of the ideal. It's not talking about any particular woman that can be named in Scripture, but an ideal of a woman that a king, by his mother, is being told this is who he should seek for. And so this is an ideal of a godly woman, a God-fearing woman. And so I thought it would be fun if we started with Proverbs 31 and then went through the rest of the series kind of judging all the other women we looked at back to that. But as it turns out, I decided against that because doing 9, she falls right in between. So we had 4 before and we're going to have 4 after. So we're going to look at comparing some of those women we've looked at in the past and how they measure up to what God says the ideal is. And then I'm going to leave it to you to go back to Proverbs 31 as we study the next 4 and look at those women based on what we read here. And so as we look in the Scriptures, we can see there are examples of both good and bad through the Scriptures. And the purpose of this series is to look at how women have influenced men, because we find that men and women alike provide us with sources of strength and inspiration. Both men and women alike can be strong motivators. As we looked last Sunday night about Deborah, this was a wife, this was a mother, and she saw a great injustice that had been happening for 20 years. And from the Word of God, when she told the commander to go and take care of it, he said, "I'll go if you go." And we read that she was in the thick of battle the same as he was. Women can be sources of great strength, of courage, and bravery. We looked at Eve in the very beginning of our study. How in Genesis 3:20, she's called the mother of all living. And she is a source of an example of moving past sin. She doesn't just have to be remembered for the fall there in Genesis 3. We read of her faith in God in Genesis 4 on 2 different occasions as her sons were being born to her. And Sarah, in February, we looked at her, that she has a unique position in that 3 times she's called the mother of something. She's the mother of nations, Genesis 17:16. She's the mother of saints in Galatians 4:26 and verse 31. And 1 Peter 3:6 says she's the mother of godly wives. She's an example of faith and overcoming one's weaknesses. And she, through the New Testament, is held up as an example of a godly wife and mother. We looked at Ruth back in March, an example of faith and virtue. It was said of her that the whole community knew of her virtue, that excellence that we're going to talk about here in Proverbs 31. And then last month we looked at Abigail. She is an example of faith, respect, wisdom, and concern. And we looked at the whole chapter of 1 Samuel 25 to see how Abigail showed us a great example and why David sought after her after the period of mourning for her husband had passed. Godly role models are greatly needed today in our society. And it's great that we have an opportunity to look at some of the godly women throughout the Scriptures and see how they measure up to our lives, how we measure up to God's standards and His ideals. And this morning we're going to be talking about one of God's ideals in Proverbs 31. As we go to Proverbs 31, 1 to 10, if we look in the very beginning, this is a part of the passage we're not going to be able to read. I'm going to summarize for you. As you look in verse 1, you might be saying, who is King Lemuel? I remember if you go back to Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1, it tells us that this book of Proverbs are the words of King Solomon. And he's the son of David. So it tells us, it doesn't leave it to our imagination who's the writer of this book. Proverbs these are the words of King Solomon, the son of King David, which would make Solomon, as we know the other scriptures, he's the son of Bathsheba. That would be his mother. So in this passage, it opens up at the end of Proverbs that these are the words of King Lemuel, an oracle taught to him by his mother. And then verse 2 begins that oracle that his mother taught him. Lemuel means in Hebrew, dedicated to God. And it's possible that this is a completely separate individual, and this was added to the works of Proverbs later. Or, as many other people believe, this is Solomon referring to himself, using this Hebrew word meaning dedicated to the Lord, and his mother then would be Bathsheba. We don't know that for sure, but whether it is a different king with a mother that is going to start talking to him, she's telling him things that he as a ruler needed to know. If it is Solomon, he had asked God for wisdom, and this whole book is about seeking after wisdom. And so it would not be surprising that then he would be recording the words of his mother. This oracle of his mother is sometimes described as, "What shall I say to you? What gems of wisdom will I pass on to you, my son, whom I have dedicated to the Lord?" That's sometimes how this is read. She was grooming him for godly leadership, not just the leadership of the kings and the nations around them, but for godly leadership. She was wise to instruct her. She told him not to spend his time in sensual lust. She says in verse 3, not to give his strength to women. She's advising against a large harem. She's saying that's not for a ruler. Not to give his time as leader to strong drink. But she says to judge righteously and to defend the afflicted. She brings it back to him of what his job as leader, what as king is. To be a righteous judge. To defend the afflicted. But then in verse 10, she then tells him the kind of woman he ought to seek after. And she tells him that her worth is far above jewels, far above rubies, or anything that a king would find easy to come by. She's saying her worth is far beyond those things. Proverbs 31 describes the ideal wife and mother. Proverbs 31:10 says, "An excellent wife who can find, for her worth is far above jewels." Not all wives and mothers are excellent. Not all wives and mothers are virtuous, as this word excellent means. Just to give you two examples that we looked at last year, as we looked at an example of mothers that were not so good, we talked about Athaliah. She is the daughter of Ahab. If you go to 2 Chronicles 22 and verse 10, you find that when she finds out her husband is dead, he'd fallen in battle, she kills all the royal offspring. Her children, her grandchildren, she kills them all to establish her own power on the throne of Judah. That is not an excellent or virtuous wife or mother. Herodias in Matthew 14, 3 through 11. She taught her daughter to dance sensually, immodestly, immorally in order to get what she wanted out of life. That too is not a virtuous or excellent trait in a wife and mother. Proverbs 31, 10 through 31, these 22 verses are written as an acrostic, and a lot of that is lost in English. I'd say all of that is lost in English. But we know there's 22 verses. The Hebrew alphabet had 22 letters, and what this means as an acrostic is every verse starting in verse 10 all the way through the end, each verse began with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so it has been called the ABCs of the ideal woman. And in the Hebrew, that was literally so. This would be the Hebrew ABCs of this godly woman. She is the woman most, if not all, godly women want to be like. She's the woman most, if not all, godly men, and I'd say even some unbelievers, look for. Some have asked the question, what does the ideal wife or mother look like? What does the ideal godly wife and mother look like? We don't have to wonder. God describes her for us here in these passages. And the value of an excellent or virtuous wife can be seen in contrast to a contentious wife, also described in Proverbs. There's many of these, but we're just going to look at two just briefly. In Proverbs 19:13, it says, the contentions of a wife are a constant dripping. How many of you have ever loved the sound of a constant dripping? We understand what the proverb writer is saying. We know what Solomon's getting at. He's saying it's annoying, right? It grates on you. He says that's what a contentious wife is like. In Proverbs 25:24, he says it's better to live in a corner of the roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. He says it's better to go somewhere and have a small space, let her have the rest of it, because it's better than that constant dripping, right? So an excellent or this virtuous wife that's being described is in direct contrast to the woman described there in Proverbs 19 and verse 25. Not all women are alike. Not all make an excellent wife or mother. As we just talked about, Athaliah, Herodias, and maybe you think of others. I think of Jezebel. She did not set a godly, virtuous example to her children. They followed in her footsteps, and we read it was to their destruction that they were slain or killed and wiped out as punishment by God. This rarity of this woman makes her special. It makes her valuable. And it makes her one that we as men ought to look for. The virtuous woman of Proverbs 31 is an ideal and what godly women ought to strive for and what godly men ought to be searching for. I have this broken down in 5 parts. You'll notice there's a lot of silhouettes because this woman is not named. We don't know who she is, but we're going to fill in the attributes that make this woman up as we go along. And one of the things I want us to do is we're going to look at this in 5 different ways. And the first of that is the relationship of the excellent wife. One, we read, if we go back to Proverbs 31:10, an excellent wife who can find, for her worth is far above jewels. That word excellent is the Hebrew word kael, Strong's 2428. It means excellent. It means great. It means mighty. It means noble, strong, valiant, valor. Oftentimes this word is used when we talk about a mighty man of valor, when we talk about a military soldier, especially under David's reign. We talk about his mighty men. This is the word kael that is often used of them. So we're talking about a woman of valor, virtue, virtuous. In fact, Ruth 3:11, this word is used of her when Boaz tells her that the whole community knew her character was excellent. She was a woman of excellence, right? That means she was a woman of virtue or valor. Some versions even use the word valor. Her worth is because of her rarity. So what makes a jewel? New King James uses the word ruby. Her worth is far above rubies. What makes a jewel or a ruby so valuable? Well, many translations or versions will use the word jewels or precious stones instead of rubies. Here, the New American, as I'm reading from, uses the word jewels. But what makes that jewel, that ruby, that precious stone, what makes it so valuable? That it's rare. That you have to go search for it. You know, if you just wanted to find a rock, you could find a rock. Women don't be the rock, and men don't search for the rock. Rocks are easy to kick over. Rocks are the easy ones to find and pick up. She's telling her son, King Lemuel, Solomon or not, she's telling her son, so this is the queen mother, telling her son, grooming him for leadership, look for that woman that is going to hold you up. Look for that woman that's going to be a great influence on you. Look for that woman whose worth is far above anything else you can pay for. That's who you're to look for. So women, don't be the rock. Men, don't look for the rock. Look for that jewel. It takes work, but she's worth it. That's what it's saying. They're not easy to come by. Proverbs 31 and verses 11 through 12, and I'm going to be reading these passages from the New King James. It says, the heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. So she is of virtuous character. She is excellent. And here we read in verses 11 and 12, and I just like the way it's read out of the New King James here. It says her husband is able to safely trust her. This tells us a lot about her, that she is trustworthy. He has no need to be jealous. He knows that because she is virtuous. I think that is important to note, that was the very beginning of her description. Because she is virtuous, she's going to be faithful to him. She doesn't cause him to doubt her motives or anything by her actions. She could go have a great girls' night out, and he's not going to doubt her actions. He's able to trust her. He has no need to doubt her motives with their wealth or the household concerns. He knows she'll do him good and not evil. He knows that he will have no lack of gain because of her. She won't be spendthrift, but rather she'll be a helpmate. Going back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, she'll be that helper that God intended her to be. Many women have destroyed their husband's heart and career by causing him to distrust her. Many men have done the same. Distrust can destroy a marriage. Distrust can destroy any relationship. Whether it's that childhood friend that you feel betrayed you or stabbed you in the back. Whether it's that friend that you have that you thought was your friend in the workplace. Your co-worker, who then uses you as their stepping stone on their way up the ladder. And you thought they were better than that. Distrust will destroy any relationship. And it says of this virtuous woman that her husband can trust in her. It says he safely trusts her because he knows she does him good and not evil. The virtuous woman from Proverbs 31 is virtuous and trustworthy. This is saying her worth is far above jewels, precious stones, rubies. She's a treasure to her husband. She's a source of great comfort to him, not pain, not contentions. She has a wonderful relationship with her husband built on trust. I don't think it's any accident that trustworthy came second. That she is virtuous, she is trustworthy. Husbands and wives ought to have a wonderful relationship and be able to safely trust each other. It shouldn't just be the wife, it should be the husband as well. Both ought to be able to safely trust one another in that relationship. So as we talk about the relationship of the excellent wife, let's now talk about the behavior of the excellent wife. And this is found in verses 13 to 19. These are passages we're not going to have time to read this morning. I encourage you to read them as we go through this. I'm going to kind of summarize these for you. But the first word in this area that I want to describe her as is she is industrious. In Proverbs 31:13 it says she works with her hands in delight. The New King James uses the word willingly. She works with her hands willingly. She's not a complainer about the tasks that she has of caring for her family. Sometimes we can kill the effects of a kind deed by complaining about having to do it. I never saw my mother do this, but I remember being at a friend's house and sitting at their house for dinner, and they, like my family, thought it was important to sit around the table. And there were times in my family's life where we didn't always do that, but there was a great period of time, especially when we were in our teens, that my family felt it was important that our schedules allowed it, as we were in school and working, if we could sit at the table all together, and that was a time for us to get caught up. I remember being at a friend's house, and after the meal, or somewhere during the meal, my friend's father, the woman's husband, compliments her on the meal and says, this tastes delicious, this is great. And I remember me and my friend were, yeah, Mrs. So-and-so, this is awesome. And she says, oh, well, it's what I had to do. And it's like, that kind of kills the compliment. if she feels like, well, thanks, it's what I had to do, it just kind of killed the moment. I see a lot of you kind of nodding. You would understand that, right? She should have just stopped with, thank you, and then kept the other thought in her head. This tells us she does these things in her delight. New King James says she does it willingly. This is something she wants to do because she loves her husband, and as they have children, she loves her children. And as we're going to see, this industriousness goes beyond just her husband and her children, but to those in her care. Proverbs 31, 14 to 15 says that she brings food from afar. Mothers sometimes go to great lengths to get just the right kind of food to please her family. Oftentimes, a mom is a short-order cook. I know my wife, Becky, will do that. And for breakfast, she goes around and she asks all of us what we want. I have a standing order. If it's not eggs and bacon, she knows it's cream of wheat. So I'm easy. If it's not eggs, then she knows I'm good with cream of wheat. But she asks the kids what they want. And I love that we can do that, because me growing up, there were 6 kids in our family. My mom was not a short-order cook for very long. We ate what she had on the table, or we learned very early on to prepare it ourselves. She said, if you don't want this ginormous pot of oatmeal, you find something and you cook it. And so we got to appreciate her hard work. We got to appreciate what she did. And so we ought to appreciate our mothers, our wives, for going that extra length to provide the foods that we love, for the foods that we want to eat. It says in verses 14 to 15, that's why she seeks wool and flax. She desires the best that she can afford for her family. And she takes care of the needs of her household. Even the servants, we're told. She sees not just beyond her family, but she sees to the need of all those in her employ. And in verses 17 to 19, she prepares herself for her task with great vigor and enthusiasm. I missed one. Verse 16 says she considers a field and buys it. From her earnings, she plants a vineyard. You know, there's nothing wrong with a mother helping out the family. And think of this. This is the queen mother telling her king, telling her son, the new king, to look for this type of woman. She has her own earnings. She looks for her own field. She buys it. She plants a vineyard. She's not just sitting idly by in the palace and letting everyone else do it. This is a woman that's going to be working the same as he is working. There's nothing wrong with a mother helping to provide for the family. But a mother has to remember that her priority is to her family first. You know, if we apply this into the New Testament, we look in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 14. Paul says to widows who are going to be remarried, he says their job is to keep the house. That has led an erroneous misconception throughout Christendom, if we want to call it that, Christianity. Many people teaching that means women can't work outside the home. And there are so many other examples against that attitude. What it means to keep the house, and it's not a good English translation of the Greek phrase there. The Greek phrase there actually, I'm going to try to say it right, I'm going to butcher it. It's oikotes pateo. It means head or ruler of the house. Quite literally, this word means guide the house, is what Paul is saying. Guide the house. So, if a woman can work outside the home and still guide the house, then she is right in the sight of God. But if she lets that work and that career become her priority, that becomes her priority, her home is the added burden, her home becomes that added responsibility, there's a balance that's not right. And she needs to bring that back into alignment with the way God has designed it. If she takes that job outside the house to help provide, that is the added responsibility. And it ought to be looked at as such. But if she ever looks at her family as they are the added responsibility, and we've seen this happen, what happens? Oftentimes the family falls apart, breaks apart. I have a great friend who, when his wife no longer looked at the job as her added responsibility, but she began resenting her family, they were the added burden and responsibility. Well, they're not together anymore. It destroyed that family. And he made mistakes, she made mistakes, but it began with the family becoming second to both of them. A mother has to remember her first priority should be to her family. In Titus chapter 2, 3 through 5, we find that older women are told to teach younger women to love their families. You know, Becky and I, we've talked about it before, we've always found that odd. It seems like that ought to be something natural. But it says older women are to teach the younger women to love their husbands, to love their children. But yet we can look in examples of the Old Testament and see women that didn't have that love. Athaliah, I can't even imagine what it took for that woman to take the lives of her children and her grandchildren. all's for her own power. That is the height of selfishness. But yet we do see people today, because of the laws of the land, they say, I don't want this child. This child's an inconvenience. This child is a burden. And the laws allow them to abort that child, to murder that child. So is it any wonder that we read that older women are to teach the younger women to love their children? We even look in nature, and there are sometimes you look at a bird or a cat, or I just saw a post recently on Facebook of someone saying their cat is a terrible mother. She doesn't watch the kittens. She goes and does her own thing and leaves them off to whatever. And then we have also seen Facebook posts of people saying, oh, my cat is a wonderful mother, and she just, we see it in nature too. So with humans, with men and women, it's no wonder then we read of Paul telling the older women to teach the younger to love their husbands and their children. Sometimes it's not as a natural thing as we would hope. In verses 17 and 19, this godly woman prepares herself for tasks with great vigor and enthusiasm. She's not afraid of strenuous work. She takes a quiet, humble satisfaction in the results of her labor. It says that after the others have gone to bed, where can you find her? Often working late into the night, making sure they have what they need for the morning. I can tell you with our family, after the kids go to bed, that's when Becky begins preparing their lessons for the next day. We homeschool, and so she begins preparing their classes for the next day, and she could be at that for hours. They don't even, sometimes they know that, sometimes they don't. I wonder how much they think about that. But they don't even know when they show up in the morning and after breakfast and they begin school, all the preparation that went into that. She's up long after they've gone to bed, preparing those things. When I was growing up, we always knew we were going to have a hard time trying to sneak out because my mom was up either reading or preparing things, and it would say we're sometimes trying to wait for her light to go out so we could do something mischievous. We were long out before that happened because we saw her with the light on and we knew she was up. We read of this woman long after the others have gone to bed. She's working late into the night. In verses 20 through 24, we read that she's a good provider and she's charitable. She finds time to provide for those less fortunate. Verse 20, she's charitable. She provides for her family. Verses 21 and 24. As men, I don't know about you, but when I was working, it didn't matter what job I had. I was working at a collection agency after being married. I was working for a home health care company. I worked in the oil field. And when I would come home, I found myself often the first thing I wanted to do, if I needed to, I'd change. If not, I would crash on the couch, and I would use the phrase, I just need to shut down. Have you ever done that? I came across this. There's an old adage that says a man's work is from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done. How often do you let your wife shut down for a moment? She needs that too. It's easy for us to get in our heads and after a day of work to say, I need to shut down, and not realize what she has been doing all day. A mother works just as many hours as her husband does, and then cooks dinner and keeps working to get the kids and things ready for the next day. She doesn't dread the approach of winter, it says in these passages, verse 24, because there's plenty of warm clothing in the closets. Verse 22, she provides for herself. Verse 23, she provides for her husband. And this, she provides a great reputation due to her influence. A woman has a great impact on the reputation of her husband. I want you to think of just one man's name and what you associate him with. When I use the word King Ahab, what's the next name generally used in the next breath? Jezebel. King Ahab and Jezebel. Why? Because through the scriptures we read, she influenced him to do more evil than any king before him. Through her influence, the scriptures tell us that he sold himself to do more evil than any king before him. She was a wicked woman. What was her influence on him? How is he remembered today? He's remembered today as a man who fell under her influence. And despite knowing what was right in all the second, third, and fourth chances that God gave this man, over and over and over, he fell for her charms and her influences every time. 1 Corinthians 11:7 tells us man is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. And in this passage, in verse 23, as he sits in the gates, And whether or not this talks about the king sitting in the gate for judgment, or we were to say this is the ideal for any person. So this could be a farmer coming in from the field into the city and meeting there at the gates. It says that as he sits there in the gates, the men praise her to him, and he's held up because of his wife. Because of her influence, he has a great reputation. And we might say today, this could be the water cooler talk. All the talk around the water cooler is, so-and-so is a great guy. Have you met his wife? Have you seen his wife? Have you been to their house? Do you know what kind of family they have? And perhaps you've heard those kinds of talk. Of people being held up based on their spouse. This is what's happening here in the city gates. The area where judgments and rulers and leadership meet. He's held up because of the influence of his wife. She is hardworking. She sees to the needs of her family. And she finds time to be charitable. But then let's look at the character of the excellent wife. The New King James says, strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. The New American says dignity, strength and dignity. This is a woman who must rely and fear the Lord. This is in order to be clothed in strength and honor. This is a woman with trust and faith in the Lord, and we'll see that later on. When a woman chooses to clothe herself in strength and honor, she's displaying divine wisdom, the kind that only comes from walking with God. Only with the peace that comes from walking with God can a woman smile at the future, as the New King James says, or rejoice in time to come. She doesn't fear the future. She rejoices in it and can smile. In verse 26, we read that she is wise. It says, she opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. I'm reminded of Abigail, as we looked at Abigail last month. In 1 Samuel 25 and verse 3, she is described not only as a great beauty, she's beautiful, but it says of her she is wise and discerning. She had wisdom, discernment, and understanding. King Lemuel's mother is telling him, look for that woman that speaks with wisdom. Look for that woman that is wise and kind. It says the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She gives good advice to her family because her words are based on the teaching. The New King James says law of kindness. Here it talks about the teaching of kindness. If you're reading from the New King James, it says the law of kindness is on her tongue. Husbands, listen to your wives. If she is wise and discerning and with great understanding, God has put her in your life as that helpmeet, that helper. Listen to your wives. That's what King Lemuel's mother is telling him. Listen to your wise wife. She is productive. Verse 27, she looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. She keeps in close touch with the affairs of her household. She doesn't waste time in shallow and unproductive activity. Her character is strength, honor, and wisdom. And she gives her family confidence to face the future. It says she's able to see the future and smile about it because she is well prepared to face it. Let's talk about the family of the excellent wife. It says in verse 28, as this is wrapping up, it says her children rise up and bless her. Her husband also, and he praises her, saying. And before we look at what he says, I want to focus on this. She is blessed. Ephesians 6, 1-3, this is not just an Old Testament concept, but children are told to honor their parents, to honor and obey their parents. This includes your mothers. Children, honor your mothers. Obey them. It is good and right. He says you want to, in the Old Testament, as they were getting ready to go into the promised land, into Canaan, Moses says, children, honor your parents. If you want to live long and well in the land, you need to honor your parents. Then it will be well with you. If we look in Ephesians 6, 1-3, we find that children today need to honor their parents. They love you and only want the best for you. And you may not always see eye to eye with them, but you need to honor and obey your parents. And in verse 31, verse 29, it says, her husband also, he praises her, saying, many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. She is praised. She's blessed by her children and husband. She's praised by her husband. He sees what she has done. He praises her. He doesn't take her for granted. He sees all that she has done, all the work that she has undertaken, and for his behalf, his children's behalf, their staff's behalf of the house, and he praises her for it. Do you see what he says to her, men? He says, many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Men, praise your wives. Praise them. Don't let what they do go unnoticed. Don't take for granted their hard work. Don't take for granted those meals that they serve you, that they cook for you. Don't just think it's something that you're due and owed because you've worked hard all day. Praise them. Thank her for it. This man is simply saying there are a lot of good women out there, but you have got them all beat. You are the best. If you haven't told your wife that, maybe you need to get that in your vocabulary. You are the best. You are the best. Ephesians 5:25 and verse 28. Husbands are told we're to love their wives as Christ loved the church. What did he do for the church? You don't have to go very far than Acts chapter 20, verse 28. He gave himself up for it. He bought it in his own blood. He gave himself for the church. Husbands are told to love their wives as Christ loved the church. Selflessly. Not selfishly. Selflessly, sacrificially. 1 Peter 3:7 says husbands are to live with their wives in an understanding way. Not that they're weaker physically, but they are precious and fellow heirs with Christ. And that if we don't, husbands, it says our prayers can be hindered. It's important the way we treat our wives. Let this man serve as an example. He praises her and says, oh, there's a lot of good women out there. But honey, you have them all beat. You are the best. Her family sees and appreciates all she's done for them and is deserving of their praise. They rise, they bless her, and they praise her. And let's talk about, lastly, the faith of the excellent wife. In Proverbs 31, verse 30 and verse 31, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the product of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Again, that reference to the gates. This is that water cooler area. This is the area that all the mingling and things happen as people are coming in and going, and they want to see the judges or the king himself. And it says, and let her works praise her in the gates. She's not patting herself on the back. This is what she has done. Her works are testament to her greatness. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. The pathway of her greatness lies through her recognition of spiritual values. A woman may have charm and beauty. She might be the most beautiful person you've ever seen, but no common sense. And that person, that woman that is beautiful with no common sense, she's not this woman. A woman might be beautiful and charming, but have no moral values. And she's not going to hold you up. She's not going to influence you for good. She's going to drag you down a path that you don't want to follow. Proverbs 30 and verse 31, verse 30. Godly men need to understand this. Your first criteria in looking for that mate, looking for that lifelong partner in life, is to look for a woman whose value is above rubies, above jewels, above precious stones. A woman who shares spiritual values. She should be a woman of faith and character. I want you to think about Ruth, what Boaz found in Ruth. In Ruth chapter 1, 16 to 18, when she told Naomi, your people are my people, your God, my God. Where you go, I go, your fate is my fate. And Boaz was able to tell her in chapter 3 and verse 11, the community knew she was a woman of excellence. And he was very happy to call her his wife. He knew what he had found. He had found that jewel among women. And this, a Moabitess, not a Jewess, a Moabitess. And he knew what he found. And he did all that he could to secure her as his wife. Men look for a wife that is first and foremost a Christian, a mate with like-minded faith. Think about Abigail. Think about what David saw in Abigail. And when he learned that her husband was dead, not taken by his hand, but by God, he sent and proposed marriage to that woman. Not only was she beautiful, but he recognized that in Abigail, this was a woman that kept him from bloodshed. She, in fact, when she came to him, she said, I want you to stop this rampage. Because when you're a king, they'll talk about how you shed innocent blood. She saved his reputation. David loved her. He saw her faith in God. When she said, "When you are king," she knew he was anointed. They didn't know how Saul's end was going to come, but she knew it wasn't at David's hands. And she said, "When you're king." She showed great faith, and David made her his wife in 1 Samuel 25. In verse 31, her works are cause for her praise. What do you think about Sarah? As we talked about Sarah, she's known as the mother of nations. Still a godly role model for saints today and godly role model for wives today, going back to 1 Peter 3:6. Husbands and children ought to praise their wife and mother for all the hard work she has done, whether at home or even at a job. That adds that greater responsibility, that greater burden to her. An excellent wife is excellent or virtuous because of her faith in God. Wives, mothers, are you living out the virtuous life of a godly wife and mother? Husbands, are you honoring God by honoring and praising your wife? And children, do you honor, obey, love, and praise your mothers? Or do you take them for granted? It's easy to take them for granted when we're kids. And I think that's why that commandment is there both in Old and New Testament, to remind us we are to give them honor. When we're older, we're going to appreciate it a lot more when we look back and see them. I found a Mother's Day card that we'd already sent my mom a card, and so I bought it because I plan to send it to her next year. It says, "Mom, thinking of all the times I was messy and chaotic and you picked up after me, all the times you cooked and cleaned for me," and you opened the card and it says, "I miss that." When I opened that card, I first thought, Alana and I were looking at it, we both burst out laughing, and I said, yeah, because adulting is hard. Children, honor your parents. Honor, love, and obey, and bless your mothers. Women, do you strive to be godly and practice the attributes that make for an excellent wife? Some might say, "I'm not a wife, I'm not a mother." It doesn't happen when that happens. That strength of character begins earlier on than that. You can start grooming yourself now by practicing those attributes that make for an excellent or virtuous character. Men, do you search high and low for that excellent wife, one whose worth is more than jewels, or do you keep picking up rocks? When you go through the dating process, don't pick up rocks. Look for that jewel. Look for that woman whose worth is far above anything. And she's going to be that blessing to you, as God describes here for King Lemuel. As we look at Proverbs 31:10 again, I find that only in obedience to God can one be worthy of praise. This excellent wife in Proverbs 31 builds her husband up, and she influences those around her. In verse 10 it says, "An excellent wife who can find? For her worth is far above jewels." It's kind of noteworthy and fitting that Proverbs ought to end on this note about this godly woman. 3 women have been prominent in this book of Proverbs. The personification of wisdom, going back to chapter 1 and verse 20, and the theme of that runs all the way through the book of Proverbs. She's seen as a woman inviting learners to her banquet, to come and feast from what she has prepared. Then there's the immoral or the adulterous woman, the seductress, starting in chapter 5 and verse 3, and really that theme of that running all the way through chapter 7. And finally, here in 31, the excellent or virtuous wife. 3 women described, and the one in contrast that we want is that woman that displays that personification of wisdom and is in contrast to that immoral woman. This is a God-fearing woman. So as we conclude this lesson on Proverbs 31, may we all strive for God's ideals. Let us give praise and honor to the godly women in our lives. Let us honor and cherish our mothers. Let us honor and cherish our wives for all the hard work that they do for us and do for others. We ought to recognize that and give them the honor where honor is due. If you're not a Christian this morning, I encourage you to become one. Before you, as a woman, before you can even start to have these attributes of that excellence, that virtue, it begins with that heart of giving yourself to obedience to God, to repent of your sins, and to be baptized for those sins. And if you are a Christian this morning in error, not living the way that you should, now is the time to make it right. Now is the time to remove those barriers of sin and begin that path again with God. And if we can assist you in anything this morning, we stand ready to assist you with the baptism, the waters of baptism, or the prayers of the congregation on your behalf. Come forward now while we stand and while we sing.